All right. So, what we're going to cover today are the biggest challenges I hear from founders when it comes to B2B sales and getting their sales function set up and that type of thing. I've already talked about my background, so we can probably skip through that pretty quickly. What happens when you become sales hire ready? So, when I talked about that, moving the dial on revenue as well as becoming sales hire ready. What does that look like? What's an example of how that's tangibly real world happened for someone who had, has their own small business and pulled some really great results from that. Just before I get into the real specifics of the sales hire readiness framework, the way that you approach that, the tactical details, I do want to touch on a couple of mindsets, right? Because I do often hear some things from founders that are totally reasonable, given the way that they've experienced crappy salespeople selling and pushing stuff on them. But if you shift these mindsets, it can be a real help to opening you up to having the right perspective to going ahead and setting up your sales function in a really, really effective way. I'll quickly then touch on a little bit of a way to think about growing and expanding your sales team. So if you do have one or two people in place, like what sort of things do you want to put in and what sort of things do you want to be thinking about to take your sales function to the next level? And then just a little bit of an offer for anybody coming along, the sales hire readiness framework. There's a free assessment that you can do that kind of gives you some information on that. So I'll give you guys a link to that so you can go and check that out and get some real personalized thinking about your sales function off the back of today's session. So that's the agenda. Let's dive in. Lots of challenges founders have around B2B sales, right? One of the things that I hear from them a lot though is, oh, I hate sales. I'm a technology person. I'm a this, I'm a that. I love this. This is why I started in business and I have to do this sales thing. And I'm not a salesperson. And so if I could just hire a salesperson, that'll fix everything. Unfortunately, I need to be the bearer of bad news that 48% of first sales hires fail, right? And the reason for that is because of this mindset of like, oh, I'll just go and hire a salesperson. They're a salesperson. They'll figure out sales, right? And I'll go into lots more detail around that, but often you don't have the things in place to support a salesperson to be successful. And on the other hand, often founders are hiring people that actually aren't a fit to be a first sales hire. It's a very different kind of salesperson to be a first sales hire, to a fifth sales hire, to a sales hire in a big, large corporate, right? Someone might be making $200,000+ a year in base salary, double that in on-target commission earnings, selling for a big corporate. You stick them in a startup and they don't sell squat, right? It happens all the time and it breaks my heart because the logic is kind of sound from a founder's perspective, but when you dive into the reality and you've lived this world, it's just not the case. The other thing that I see happen is the founders are always relied on to drive all the sales. Maybe you've got into sales, maybe you've kind of figured out how to do it, right? But nobody quite does it the way that you do. And to be honest, they're not, right? There's a thing that founders have that isn't replicable, but there are things that are, and extracting that out, putting that into a structure, a framework, and a process, and then getting the right salesperson to go and enact that is a really key kind of pivot point in your business to open up scale that if you don't get through, often businesses can be stuck at for years, right? And it can really be that plateau for them. The other thing that I see often is founders get into business and they're selling and they're using their network to get going, right? Which you definitely should do, right? But what happens when you get to that point where you've kind of maxed out your network and you're like, who do I sell to now? Like I've never done a cold call before. I've never done cold outreach before. Like, what does that look like? How do I go about that? The next one is, do I invest in sales or marketing, right? And so many founders are like, sales and marketing, what's the difference? That's kind of the same thing, isn't it? Just to give everyone a really basic definition, I'm sure people will have better ones out there, right? But marketing to me is like relationship building. It's educating people who may at some point want to buy what it is that you have, solve the problem that you're able to solve, right? Sales is about going and kind of like sniper shooting, looking for someone who's got the problem, is ideally aware or somewhat aware of the problem, but needs to solve it now, right? There's a need to solve their problem now. Otherwise, you kind of take what you've got, hand it back to marketing and get them to educate, nurture so that at the right timing, you can get in touch with them, right? And timing is a big piece. I'll talk about that as in one of my frameworks I go through later, right? when you can qualify the timing that someone needs to buy in, it really educates you as to how much time you invest in that lead, how predictable that it is that it's going to turn into revenue, those sorts of things. So yeah, anyway, that's a collection of different challenges. Hopefully with today's session, we're going to go and give you some of the information to help you cover off those challenges and move forward with things. So our background, like I said, I've been a first sales hire and taken built the first $1 million in revenue in a B2B software company right from the ground up. Found a sales solution where we've been first sales hires. That's kind of who we are and what we do. But we also understand founders, right? Like there's a lot of great early stage salespeople out there. There's a lot of great founders out there, but it's a really unique mix to understand the founder lens as well as the salesperson lens. And that's what myself and our team here do at Found a Sales Solution. So what does it look like when you do become sales hire ready? What's a tangible real world example of what that looks like? This is my friend here, Peter van der Merwe. Pete came to me and said, can you help me hire a salesperson, right? I want to grow this business. I've been stuck at doing about 300 grand a year in revenue for multiple years. I want to take this business to the next level. I need to hire a salesperson. I said, great, I'll help you. Then I started looking into the process and I said, why do we want to hire a salesperson, right? You want to grow, but why in particular that? And he's like, well, that's what I need to do to grow, right? And I said, well, actually, I think, you're doing the selling so far. You haven't really been trained in sales, but you're good enough with people. You've got kind of that founder lens. What if instead of hiring a salesperson, we set up your CRM really effectively? I trained you on sales. We put in some sales methodology, all of those sorts of things, use the sales hire readiness framework. And so we worked together just 2 hours a week on doing that, right? Fast forward 6 months, a lot of different strategies, things that we tried, all sorts of things. He'd more than tripled his revenues to over $1 million, right? By getting sales hire ready, even though we didn't hire him a salesperson, right? At that point, we actually had to pause working together because it was a services-based company and he'd maxed out like the services that he could deliver, and was like, we have to pause, like, I need to build more capacity. Thankfully, for the guys listening here today, you've got software as a service and technology companies, so hopefully scaling isn't such an issue for you there, right? Which allows you to continue on there and then go hire your salesperson. But I guess what I'm pointing out here is you can do things that really build revenue, and put the puzzle pieces together really effectively to grow in a way that's aligned with how you want to grow and scale your business. So those key mindsets I was promising you earlier that I'd sort of talk about, right? Often sales is really measurable at the end result, the outcome, right? We can all see what revenue comes in, hits the bank, right? But the inputs that lead to that can be really confusing as to, have I got the right inputs? How do I move the dial on that end number, right? And it doesn't have to be a black box of we just work really hard and we hope that out the other end pops some sales, and if it doesn't work, well, then it must be the product's fault, right? It's like, actually, there's kind of some structures you can put in place, some measurable things, and that's the sales hire readiness framework that we'll talk about, that gives you what are those inputs and what are those measurable things that aren't the end result of revenue that allow you to, and eventually move that end result of revenue. The second thing there is, I can be a good human, make good sales, and make good money. The amount of founders I talk to that are like, I hate sales, I don't like sales, sales feels icky, blah, blah, blah. The reason that you feel that way is so valid, right? We've all received really crappy cold calls from people that speak over the top of us, don't listen to us, haven't done any research into the problems that we have and why we might want to buy. They're just calling through, the yellow pages list or the big long spreadsheet, or they got those terrible dialers that, like, you answer the phone and it kind of pauses for 3 seconds before it actually connects you. And it's some dialer who, barely speaks the language. Like, all of that stuff, icky, gross, yuck, right? But you can actually find a way to do sales that feels good. You don't have to do anything slimy, and you can make good money. It is possible. So if you can just be open to that as we go through this presentation, as you think about sales and get curious about finding your way of doing that, right? We'll jump into some of those specifics here. So just before I get into how do we solve those challenges that we've talked about and all of the things, I just want to check in if there's any questions coming through, Ryan, if you've got any sort of questions or prompts for us before we jump into this side of things.
I mean, I was going to ask you, like, when you keep talking about being sales hire ready, I was going to ask you, like, what are the trigger points, but I suspect you're probably going to go through that in just a moment. Yeah, this is great so far, man. Crack on.
Perfect. Awesome. So for those of you following along here, you can see there's a little link on this page here. So this is the Sales Hire Readiness Scorecard test link, right? It's a free assessment. It takes 5 minutes. I'm going to talk you through the elements of it so that if you do go ahead and do it, it can make even more sense for you, right? It was produced by a company called the Justified Talent Group. They're specialist recruiters in first sales hires, right? There's so many recruiters out there that say they do everything or even like specialize in sales, but I've only met one that actually specializes in your very first sales hire, understands that early stage journey, and has gone deep on understanding what it takes to be a successful first sales hire. So, look, they're amazing. I partner with James and the team there as well. So if you're looking for someone, shout out to them. But it's their framework that's actually really interesting because I had my framework of how I worked, and they'd kind of articulated and created this scorecard assessment. So it's why we talk and use this together. So okay, you go and do the assessment, right? So you can click on that link, go and do the test, and you'll get a result where you'll get a score out of 100, right? You'll actually get 5 scores out of 100. The first one is your overall score. How sales hire ready are you, right? Now, the rule of thumb for that, if you get a result of anything below 80, if you hire a salesperson and they don't work out, the fact is there's things that you could have done to help make them more successful, right? It's kind of on us if the score's below 80. If the score's 80 or above, it's on your who you've chosen as the salesperson. They're the wrong salesperson. You've set them up with the right foundations. You've chosen the wrong person, right? And to have that clarity of is it us, is it them, is it a combo of both, right? Because sometimes it totally can be, right? But bringing that clarity to the surface, super helpful. That's what you get out of the high level score result. Then you go into the 4 elements of what makes up that sales hire readiness, right? And you'll get a score on each of those 4 elements. So the first of those elements is affordability. So affordability wise, like, why are we even talking about this, right? Like, we bring on a salesperson, they're supposed to, make money for us, Here's the reality in B2B sales. There's lots of myths that you can find, great commission only salespeople and those sorts of things, right? And I use the word myth because when you're in B2B sales, the reality is, so this is the market that you're competing against if you're hiring B2B salespeople. An average B2B salesperson, and I mean average, like not cream of the crop or, very like junior-ish, kind of knows what they're doing, got a lot of learning to go to really extract the most value out of their selling time, 100 grand a year base salary, you know, up to double that in commission earnings potential, right? And when you can just walk into that as an average B2B salesperson out there in the market, why would you go commission only? Why would you go into a startup? Why would you go into an environment where there's more risk that you won't get your commission payouts and all of those sorts of things, right? And so the reality is, if you're going and hiring a B2B salesperson, you want to have kind of 3 to 4 months, 4 months ideally worth of their salary kind of put aside. Because the thing is too, most of the time in B2B, particularly if you're selling to the larger end of town, sales cycles aren't immediate. There is lag time, right? And sure, you can provide them with some pipeline to get going, and you can expect them to find some of their own pipeline, but they need time to ramp up, to get around things. And if you're expecting them to make all their sales 2 weeks in, and the sales cycle takes 3 months, it's just doesn't add up, right? And then you got pressure on them, and then you're looking at firing them before they've even got started. It's just a nightmare, right? So this is just a real foundational thing. Have 3 to 4 months of their salary put aside, ready to go, so you can really give them a proper crack, and you not to be freaking out from day one. You can really give them the right support to get going and get started. Then comes the system side, right? Now, there's lots of systems you can put in place for sales. There's a couple that I think really stand out to me that move the dial for early stage businesses. The first is a CRM. Now, I know that sounds really basic, but I've worked with so many founders that are working out of spreadsheets or working out of like project management tools or, whatever they've got for delivery or whatnot. Like, I really encourage you to get a CRM set up, and you don't need to spend tons of money. Heck, most of my clients are on HubSpot using the free version. You've got some deals in a pipeline. You've got some notes associated to them. You're moving them along in the process, and you've got tasks that remind you to keep up to date with them. that's the foundations. That's what you need. You can throw all the bells and whistles in the world on top of that over time as you grow, as there's more money available, as you've worked out your processes more effectively, right? You do need to do things a bit more manually when you're getting going before you throw those automations and all of those things that a CRM can offer, in down the line. The next thing is your lead generation system. So there's lots of ways to find leads, and it's totally reasonable that you hire a salesperson. You expect them to do some of their own lead generation, right? But if you haven't got a way of even finding leads in the first place, if a salesperson walks in and they don't have a couple of leads to work with, you're basically asking them to be a founder, not a first sales hire, right? A first sales hire is a first sales hire, not a founder, because that's what they are. That's what they're choosing to do, right? There is a difference. To me, it's your job as a founder to figure out at least how to get a couple of leads in a month, right? A handful, so that the salesperson can kind of see, okay, you've kind of somewhat maybe proven this product market fit. You kind of know how to get these conversations going, and think of them as kind of the fuel on the fire to that, that initial kind of embers that you've got burning, that kindling that you've put down. You need to have that reference point for them to go and build on, and they can be creative and leverage all of that. But you do need to have that foundation in place, because it's just a totally different game to walk into somewhere where it's like, go find all your own leads from scratch. We've barely got some systems and processes in place, go and sell our thing, versus like, hey, we get 5 leads a month. This is the type of characteristics of them. This is what they look like. Here's those leads. You're probably going to need 10 to 15 leads a month to go and hit your number. Go and figure out how to go and take those 5 into 10 and, leverage me or my network or whatever I can do to support you, right? It's a very different environment to walk into like that. And it really does change the likelihood of success. So what we're talking about there is figuring out those lead generation systems, all sorts of things, from like leveraging your own networks, going out to industry events and those type of things. Hopefully a helpful tip. And this is how I got this sales consultancy I started with now really going. And it's worked for a lot of my clients. Literally just sit there on LinkedIn for 2-3 days. It's boring as hell, right? But you sit there and look at every network connection that you have there and just have a look at their job titles, and any of them that you can relevantly have a conversation with, to talk about what you do or partnering with what you do to solve some problems for some people. It's a really quick fire way, a little bit boring, but hey, you're a founder, you're trying to figure this out, like you're trying to get a handful more leads just to prove out what are those characteristics, and that can hopefully then give you the foundations to share with the said salesperson. So number one point there, CRM. Number 2 point there, lead generation systems. Number 3, I want to talk about sales methodology. Now, a lot of people, when I say sales methodology, they think I'm talking about sales process. It's a big difference between sales process and sales methodology. Sales process, everyone, is when you open your CRM and those stages in your pipeline. First meeting booked, proposal sent, negotiations in place, contract signed, deal won, right? That's your sales process. When we're talking about a sales methodology, we're talking about, how do you score each deal that goes through that process? How do you decide whether to invest more time in this lead or this deal, or to walk away from it? And so the way that you do that is using a sales methodology. Now, the simplest form out there, there's tons of stuff on the internet. I didn't come up with it, but I do recommend that if people don't have something and they're looking to put something in place, is BANT. That's budget, authority, need, timing. You hop on that first sales call. You talk to them about what sort of available money they've got to solve this type of problem in the budget. You ask them if they're actually the end decision maker, or if they're a small business, maybe they need to go and talk to their partner, their business partner, their life partner. If they're a larger business, do you need to get approval from the board, or your boss or your manager's manager, or what does that look like? The need, like, why do they actually need this thing? Are they just kind of shopping around and interested in, what it is that you have, or do they genuinely have a problem that they need solving? And then timing, what sort of timeline does it look like if they were going to go ahead and make an investment decision and moving ahead with something? What does that timeline look like for them? Are they trying to buy it by the end of the financial year? Do they need to make a decision? Yes. Do they need to solve this problem yesterday? Or are they just shopping around and they'll get to it at some point, and they know it's a problem and they'll kind of get there, and, maybe at some point, and they'll get back to you and blah, 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 right? If you can figure out those 4 things really quickly in that first conversation, it helps you and the person you're talking to really work out, like, is there something here? Is this actually a real deal that's going to move ahead, and we're all going to, have a bit of a win-win here? Or is this actually something to maybe hand back to marketing, right? Or call them back in 3 months, you know? Um, Super important. Now, band is the most basic form. It works really well with my clients. We tend to top out around about sort of a $15,000-$20,000 a year sale with that type of methodology. If you want to start selling things at higher ticket prices, particularly if you're going up into large, like more medium-sized businesses and large enterprises, you do want something a bit more sophisticated. Personally, I train the TAS, target account selling methodology. It's got 20 questions with 100 questions behind that, sort of backing them. There's lots of different other frameworks out there, Medic and Miller Hyman and all those sorts of things. But it is a really important foundation for you as a founder to kind of figure out how to use one of those methodologies, do it behind your sales, put it behind your CRM and your lead generation. And then somebody walks into a business, you've got a way to keep that salesperson accountable. Even if they're a sales professional and you're not, you now have well, how'd you go with the BANT on that call? Oh, I forgot to ask that question. Oh, interesting. Why is that? Come on, salesperson. Like, like keeping them accountable, keeping them on their toes, right? Because obviously you can do with that with the revenue, but if there's deal lag, you want a way to, look at those things that lead to the deal being won or not, or work out how believable it is that, they'll actually close that revenue that they're saying that they will. Awesome. Just before I go on, any questions around any of that, Brian, or anything coming through?
Yeah, had a couple, and if anyone else does, feel free to drop them in the chat. With the 4 month salary rule,
Yes.
does that mean that you need to give people at least 4 months before you decide to let them go if it's not working out, or you just need to mentally have that in place before you hire them? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question. I think the answer is like having it in place is the important thing. If you've gone through the hiring process right, you probably need 3 months to work out if they're going to be a fit or not, right? If you don't have the experience to go through the sales hiring process, right, and you get a few weeks in and they're slacking off and they're taking, they're just not doing the work or whatever, of course, fire them as early as you think it's just obvious they're not going to be a fit, right? But there are salespeople now. I know a lot of people just expect that salespeople are out there and charismatic and hit the ground running and get results yesterday and all of that jazz, right? There are actually, like, I'll give you this kind of adage that one of my sales mentors said to me, which is the best salespeople, what do? They actually ask the best questions, right? In consumer sales, charisma and rapport building and all of those things can be the thing that sticks you out. In B2B sales, there's got to be a lot more logical justification because you're spending money to make money and it's a different type of decision-making process. And so you need to take that empathy level, that questioning level, that understanding of the realities of what's going on around them to the next level, if that makes sense. So, yeah, so it can be a little bit kind of, you might hire a salesperson that isn't what maybe some of you think is the what an ideal salesperson sounds, looks like, smells like, that type of thing. But you need to give them that time, and those types of ones that ask really good questions and take a little bit longer to get going. With my study of personality profiling, those ones actually can tend to close bigger deals if they're listening and take a little bit longer to get going. So it all and it depends on the sales cycle length, right? If your sales cycle length is 2 weeks, because you're selling something, you've got great marketing behind, and it's 10 grand or something like that, and you can just kind of take it off the shelf, and you've got a system around it, and you provided them a ton of leads and they've sold nothing in 6 weeks. It's like, well, yeah, get rid of them, right? So I think it's contextual, but yeah, if you've got a long sales cycle and somebody's getting up to scratch, and you feel like you've really hired someone right, but they haven't quite got there yet, I would be giving them that sort of 3 months. 3 months kind of thing. Like I tend to say, if someone's not working out after 3 months, I'll be able to tell you, even if it's a 6 month sales cycle, because of my level of experience. So yeah, I know that's not a direct answer, but hopefully that gives some good context.
That makes sense. Do you have time for 2 more quick questions before we move on?
Let's go for it.
Yeah. So second one thing that's come up in mastermind calls a fair bit is people who are not salespeople or are kind of unfamiliar with that world. A lot of them have heard of BANT, but they feel really awkward asking about budget and authority in particular. Like it's a bit weird to say, so how much money do you have to spend on this? Like, is there a more tactful way, or do you have any sort of, magic lines that you could use to figure out whether they've got the budget for it and whether you're talking to the right person who is decision maker? Like, is there a more subtle way of sneaking in rather than, you're the boss, if not, put him on, please, or put her on, please? Yeah.
Yeah. No, totally. What you've highlighted there, right? And I want to call this out for everyone, right? Sales is science and art, right? Some people argue it's one or the other. My argument is that it's both, right? The science is asking the questions of Bant. The art is the way that you ask the questions of Bant, right? And actually, my mate Pete van der Merwe that was on the slides earlier, he had this exact question around budget. I was like, oh, you got to ask the budget. He's like, what do you mean? I can't ask them what their budget is. Like, that'll sound like weird and pushy, and like they won't answer that, and all of these sorts of things, right? And so what I did was I hopped on a call with him. Didn't even know the details of his product per se, right? But I understood the commercial outcomes that the client was trying to achieve. And I said to them, so, okay, let's fast forward. You're here today to work out if working with us sort of makes sense for you to solve these types of challenges. Let's say that we were able to solve those challenges, and we'll talk you through the details of how that looks and everything like that. But let's say we were able to, right? In order to solve those challenges, in our experience, it's probably going to cost you a budget of around XYZ. How does that sit with you? Is that something that you have access to?
Okay.
Right? Like, you can ask the blunt question of like, hey, do you have, like, what's your budget for this, right? Sometimes you get an answer, right? And it's a good question to ask if you have the courage to ask it right up front, right? And they go, oh, no, we're not really sure, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, in our experience, in order to solve the problem that you've got, you're probably typically going to need to spend about blah. Is that something that you have access to? If the answer is no, great. We've just qualified out, wasting both of our time. If the answer is I'm not sure, orange flag, let's probe into that, right? Oh, okay. So what were you expecting to sort of invest in solving this type of a problem? It's not pushy. It's totally reasonable, right? Now, this is the art bit, right? Like, and I'm giving you guys hopefully an example you can take away, but this is where sales coaching comes in, right? I don't like sales trainings and courses that are one-off. Like, where you really get the difference is ongoing sales coaching to kind of refine that. So what I did with Pete was I asked it on one of the calls on his behalf, on behalf of his company, to one of his clients with him live on the call. So he saw me do it. The next call, he hopped on the call and kind of fumbled his way through it and sort of said it a bit like the way that I did, but it was also kind of a bit awkward, and they sort of gave him an answer, but wasn't fully clear. And then I hopped off the call with him and I gave him some coaching with it, gave him another example. And then we hopped on another call, and then he got a lot better at it. And by the next call, he was nailing it, right? Rolling off the tongue, all good, right? And you've got to do that for each of the parts of Bant, each of the parts of, target account selling, whatever other, like the deeper that you go into it, and finding these ways to ask questions that are just reasonable. No big deal, right? We're all here trying to figure out if this makes sense. I'm not here pushing on you. Like, if you say to me that it's out of budget and you just don't have access to it, right? Like, unless it's like a really bad decision for you to not go and find that budget, I'll let you go. I'll like walk away, right? And this is where that icky salesperson thing comes in, is they push you when it doesn't make sense, right? The greatest salespeople push you when it does make sense, and it just takes a bit of effort or a bit of a mindset shift perspective, or there's extra work to be done or whatever, but it's really important and it's a smart decision to go ahead. That's when they push. But if it's not a smart decision, if they're willing to walk away, that's when things stop feeling icky and gross,
Awesome. That's a really good answer. Final question before we move on, and I apologize if I'm making you lose your train of thought.
Good.
When it comes to CRMs, one question that has popped up a few times on mastermind calls is, should it be the founder deciding on the CRM, or should they kind of delegate that to whoever the first sales hire is? The logic being that person, A, should use the system that they know and love enough, are already familiar with, and B, they're probably best positioned. They're going to be the one using it. They're probably the one best positioned if they've got more experience, using a CRM than the founder does. Does it make more sense for that person to be the one who sets it up within the business? What are your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't worry too much about that. What I'd worry about is getting a CRM in place.
Okay.
Who picks it, what system it is, just make sure it's actually a CRM. You know
Mm,
what I mean? That it's not a project management tool that you're
mm,
kind of bastardizing. Like it needs to have that, oh, it can capture the emails that we send automatically and log that into the CRM, that type of
mm,
stuff, right? If you pick one and the salesperson's like at the end of the day, having Pipedrive or HubSpot or Zoho or whatever else isn't the reason why you're successful in sales, right? It comes down to the person, these things around sales, hire readiness. The tools are the tools. Yeah, some are slightly better than others or whatever, but it's not the thing that makes the difference, right? So my encouragement is just pick one, just get it set up. Because if a salesperson walks into a spreadsheet versus a CRM, even if it's not their ideal CRM, it's better that one's set up. I'd lean towards that side. But if they,
mm,
kick and scream and swear by this other one and it's going to make them way more productive and doesn't cost that much, it's like, go figure it out. Just hit your sales number. You can change
mm,
our CRM. Like, who cares, right? Like, that's fine. It's a small thing in the mixture of things. I think there's lots of things that salespeople and founders can get stuck on when it
mm,
comes to setting up sales. And I get a little bit ruthless about this because your prioritization is really important. And it's like, just get the thing in place. That's the
mm.
important thing.
That makes a lot of sense. Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Some great questions there. And anybody else, feel free to drop those in. I'll take a pause in another moment. So the next section of sales hire readiness is marketability. This is like, you've probably heard of like creating your ideal, persona and those types of things, right? And marketing has a really good idea of creating your persona and how old they are and their psychographics and demographics and all of those things. And that stuff's really important, right? And that helps take you down that path, right? From a sales lens, you know, understanding that target market and that ideal customer and where you sit in the market in and amongst all of them. A really good prompt that I have for this is to think about the problem that they have, um, the situation that means that they need to solve this problem, um, how they're where they're positioned in the organization in the business. That means they've got the means, the ability, or the authority, to solve the problem. They need to solve this problem, and and they want to solve it now. Right now, I know that's a collection of a whole bunch of different things, and you're probably not going to get that right from the get go as you're getting going as a founder. But if you think about things of how can I spend more time in front of potential clients who have the problem, the situation, the means, and the need to buy now. If you take that adage and you just start getting curious and almost pseudo obsessed with how do I find more of these elements at once in a prospect, where do I show up? Where are they hanging out? How do I get in touch with them? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they at trade conferences? Are they in my network? Are they in partners of mine's network? Like, how do we get access to those people, right? And what do they look like? What are those traits? That's a really good place to start and to dovetail in if you have done any of that persona work around marketing and those sorts of things. Um, and the mindset that I want you to take to this is that it's an ever-going sales and marketing feedback loop, right? One of the things that I talk about in the fourth section here, enabling, is having your weekly sales meeting. And the reason that I talk about that is because not only does it give us a chance to check in on the deals and how they're going and how we're going against our revenue goals and all those sorts of things, but every time you close a deal, right? And because it's really exciting to close a deal, you get, pull out the party poppers and celebrate and hit the gong and whatever else, and you've made a sale. That's awesome, right? I love that. Always celebrate your wins, right? Once you've celebrated the win, take a moment and go, why did we win that? How did we get in touch with them? What was the problem that they had? What was the situation that meant they need to do something about it? Why did they have the means, and the ability to go and invest in a solution to solve this problem now? Right? Why did they buy now? Break that down, right? Have a moment of reflection and take those insights and put that back into your sales and marketing efforts to go and better understand who that profile, that customer is, help you with your cold outreach, help anybody that's, doing marketing, and just constantly have this feedback loop going, right? It's something that often founders do intuitively, but as the business gets bigger, you've got sales and marketing and people aren't talking to each other as much, right? It just needs to be a constant feedback loop. One of the ways that I do that is obviously the weekly sales meeting, but then at the end of each quarter, we've just finished a quarter, or the end of the financial year here in Australia. And so what that gives me the chance to do with all of our clients is look at the last 3 months and go, who are all the deals that we won? which ones are the ideal ones that we want more of? What are all the characteristics of why they went and bought with us? How do we break that out and feed that back in for this quarter and be strategic about how we take that sales and marketing feedback loop to the next level, and inevitably that marketability? Because if you can be really clear on who you're selling to and what those characteristics are, makes it a lot easier for you and or said, first sales hire to come into the business. The fourth and final thing of the sales hire readiness framework is enabling, right? Now, I know as founders, sometimes you take the mindset of like, let's hire a salesperson. They're a salesperson, so they should know how to sell. Yes, they should, but also there's a reason they're a salesperson who's doing the sales work, as opposed to being a sales manager or a sales director or a chief revenue officer or whatever, right? Like there is levels in the sales world. And so if you hire a salesperson under $150,000 a year in salary, they're going to need elements of sales management, accountability, that type of thing. So you being the founder, you take on that role. You're all of a sudden their boss. You're all of a sudden a sales manager, whether you kind of wanted to be or not, right? And what is a sales manager? What do they do? Why are they valuable? Like why do all these businesses across the world, invest in sales managers and sales leadership? And why do they pay these big, huge, expensive salaries and commission packages and all of that sort of thing, right? It's because of these elements that we're about to go through. And by the way, guys, you don't need to hire a sales manager, sales leader. You can hire a sales rep, but having these things in place or working with someone like ourselves is where you can get these type of support in the level that you need it, which is not full time, right? I'm guessing a few of the people on this call have heard about fractional chief marketing officers, chief financial officers. And that's kind of what we do is fractional sales management, right? So what does that entail, right? The first that you can see there is sales meetings and accountability and planning without overkill, right? We don't need a meeting every 5 minutes and like they might in some larger organizations where the system is built all the way out, right? But I think a real fundamental is the weekly sales meeting. So what does that entail? Why are you having that weekly sales meeting? Well, it's because it fits in context of the whole overall plan. So what is the overall plan? I see a lot of founders say, who go out there and just sell as much as they can, right? Great. That's a really great mindset for you to take as a founder. It's your baby. It's your business. You live and die by that, right? When you hire a salesperson, you need to give them context, right? What does success look like, right? Because if it's just run as hard as you can and make as many sales as you can, it doesn't say whether spending lots of time on this type of sale is actually the smart thing to do to reach the results that we need to reach, right? Let me give you an example. If you say, let's hire a salesperson, let's go and make $1 million a year in revenue out of this salesperson, right? Versus let's go and make $250K a year out of, this salesperson, right? All of a sudden, a $25,000 deal at 250 is probably, pretty important, right? It's 10% of our yearly target. 25,000 on $1 million, it's 2.5% of our target, right? How much time do we invest in it? How many of those do we need in the pipeline? Like, are we doing enough activity to hit those sort of goals, right? And so it contextualizes everything. So now that we have our yearly target, we then break that down into quarters and we factor in end of financial year kind of increases, or in Australia around sort of December, January, things go pretty quiet for us. I know in other environments, there's different times of year with summer holidays and different things where, the sales numbers kind of fall off, or your industry in particular might be extra busy or less. Factor that in. So you've now got a yearly target with quarterly targets and factored into the ebbs and flows of your sort of market and cycle. And then you have a quarterly plan, which is like, hey, this quarter, we're going to go and prioritize these sales and marketing activities to move the dial and try and make, more revenue and figure out our next way of finding more leads or optimizing our sales process or whatever it is. And then you've got the weekly sales meeting to keep accountable to that, right? Because if we're trying to hit 250K this quarter and we're 4 weeks from the end of the quarter and we've made $240,000 worth of revenue, we're feeling pretty good, right? But if we've made $10,000 of revenue, we're probably pretty nervous, right? And the reality is you'll probably be somewhere in the middle of that. But if you're tracking that week in, week out and going, how are we going to our target? Oh, okay, we're on track. So let's invest some more medium, long-term pipeline building, or we're off track. We need some leads that are going to buy now. We need to try something new. We need to leverage our network more. We need to run a promotion. If you're constantly in that mindset of how are we going against our target, it gives that focus, right? Because there's so many things that we can do, right? But if everything's contextualized, it then gives kind of the salespeople a target to go after in order to hit their target, like it all kind of lines up the pieces there. The next thing that I want to talk about, as apart from that structure and sales meetings and accountability and planning, is like a personalized, like a culture of personalized sales rep development. So why do I call that out, right? You're hiring a salesperson because they're supposed to be good at sales, right? Let's think about the psyche of someone who goes and takes a job in sales, particularly someone who takes a riskier first sales hire role or is in those first sales hires, right? Why do they do it? Because they're innately attracted to growth. Their literal job is to grow your business, is to grow their income, is to not have a guaranteed salary because they're trying to make commissions and that type of thing. Their whole mindset is growth. What do you think that sort of person needs in order to keep motivated? They need growth on a personal career development level, right? Now, I've got a structure and a framework of taking someone from, in Australia, these are Australian dollars, right? $80,000 a year salary through to $160,000 a year. Every $20,000 bracket of salary income, you get certain levels of skill that a salesperson has and certain things that come along with that, right? And so when you can sort of plot where a salesperson's at and you know how to take them to the next level, I've just been doing this actually as we've closed out the end of the financial year here, is talking with our sales reps and sort of saying, hey, where are you at? What sort of areas do you want to work on? How can we, do some sales coaching, kind of like I did with my mate Pete that I was telling you about before. I hopped on the calls and gave him an example. Like, how do we take them to the next level, right? So even if it's not as deep as hopping on calls and those things, using pads or Bant or whatever to train them on the next level there or whatever, like give them that next piece in their learning journey because it's going to keep them motivated. It's also going to help them make more ROI on their sales time, which is going to in turn benefit your business and the revenue that you've got, right? Now I can use those structures as well for working with founders, right? Like, founders can be trained in sales to go to the next level. And that's actually what we did with my mate, was I could sort of point out where those things were. And so you do want to have that kind of growth development sort of support for the salesperson to get the most out of them. In and amongst all of that, there's a couple other things that you can see there on the slides, and I've already touched on these briefly earlier on, but the culture of being okay to walk away from deals, qualify out if they're not a fit. Quite often as a founder, when you're figuring it out, you just run after everything that you possibly can. As you're hiring a salesperson, as you're maturing a sales function, like knowing what's not a fit for you and being okay to walk away from that is a skill that the salesperson and yourself need to learn. You have a culture that's okay. And that challenger mindset of challenging when the prospect, the opportunity isn't making a smart business decision, right? Like having the courage to go, hey, we solve this problem every day, right? Week in, week out, we see the results from it, blah, blah, blah. You're an expert in your particular problem. These prospects, business owners, whoever it is that you're selling to, often they're solving this problem once or a couple of times in their business career, right? Their whole like job at the moment isn't around solving that problem. And when you can see those insights, going and sharing them with that person, that's actually a real service, right? Like that's actually really valuable. And that's how you get to feel awesome as a salesperson, that you're really being helpful rather than a pushy, manipulative, better get this across the line so I can hit my commission target, sort of salesperson. Okay, I've talked a ton there. I'll check in. Any more questions from you, Ryan, or coming through on the chat?
Yeah. One thing, I don't know, it's sort of between this section and the previous one. I've heard a few people recommend hiring two people. So if you can hire someone, hire two people, because it's almost like you're A/B testing then, because that's something that will help you figure out, is it me? Is it them? Ideally it wouldn't be both, but if you get two sales reps and one of them is smashing ahead and the other one's really struggling, okay, well, it's probably not me then because I've given the same resources to both. However, we had a situation a while back where someone was saying, okay, well, this is the budget that I have to hire a person. Do I get one more experienced person, or do I spend that money on two more junior people? Like, what's the best way to structure that? I don't know if you've got a section on hiring coming up, but I just wanted to ask that question.
No, that's a great call out. Okay, so hiring two people at once, great idea. not often affordable
Mm.
for particularly bootstrapped business owners that are trying to figure out their first sales hire. So often what would tend to happen is getting that first sales hire or two right individually, and then being able to hire two at a time. I've got a recruiter that I work with who only hires two at a time, right? Like they're top end of town,
Mm.
really expensive and amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more the sales hire 3 and 4, just from an affordability perspective, right? Because it is great, right? It's like they get there, there's that, unsaid competition, also the camaraderie, like it's awesome. But the reality of that happening isn't always the case, particularly as you call out from that budget perspective. Now, that doesn't mean that I take the attitude of just invest in the more expensive salesperson or hire two junior ones if you do have the affordability. I think it actually really comes down to figuring out what level of salesperson you need based on the type of sale that you're making. So I'm
Okay.
going to try and give as much perspective on this as I can in a couple of minutes, but this is quite a detailed thing to work out, right? Like some of my clients, I'm like, one of my clients I worked with, right? They're a tech company, SaaS company based in Adelaide here in Australia. They had one of the best early stage product market fits I'd ever seen, right? They hired in some average salespeople who still did really well. Why?
Hmm.
Because they had great product market fit. Like they were paying these people less as well, right? Like they were more junior in their career, whatever, right? And so that worked out great, right? But I had another client I'm working with who's trying to sell into the big corporate end of town. They're complex, long sales cycles. We're talking multi-$100,000 deals. We're talking they had some of this sales hire readiness stuff down in place. They needed to spend more money on someone, right? Like these guys actually recommended, I was like, you guys need 130 to 150K salary sort of person, right? And I've said that to a couple of my clients. I had another one who was like, oh my God, I can't spend 150 salary on a sales hire or whatever. And I was like, do you actually have the cash to do it? The answer was yes. I said, for the type of sale that you're making, like they were selling ERP,
Mm.
software and implementation of a big, long, complex sales cycles. I was like, the difference that you will get out of spending that extra 20K will just be phenomenal, right? And the founder actually sat me down 6 months later after, the person we'd hired had smashed their second quarter target by 20%, like overachieving. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad you got me to spend that extra 20K, right? Again, in other situations, you can get someone a little bit more middle of the road, right? So it's how complicated is the sale,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore how much do you need to spend on them? And there is also kind of like the upper limit. Like I had another client come to me and go, oh, we found this guy, he's amazing, wants early 200s. I'm like, that's great, right? Like if you got the cash and want to go for it, like go for it. Do you need somebody at that level? No, you can find someone who can close the sales that you need to close at this type of salary, these type of commission plans. But if you want to go with that person, you totally can. It's just going to burn a little bit more cash, or you need to put a specific structure in place that makes that work, right?
Mm.
So this is a little bit of an art thing that comes with experience, but hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of a taste of there is strategy behind this, and at
Mm.
least try and think through that, or reach out to someone like myself or my team, and there is a little bit of process to working that strategy out.
Mm.
Yeah.
And one final question before we move on is when juggling those budget decisions, are you better off getting someone a little bit more junior but feeding them lots of leads and using more of that budget to drive leads, as opposed to or do you get someone more expensive with the expectation that they'll have the means and the ability and the skills to sort of go find pipeline themselves?
You're tapping on some very good but deep questions here, Ryan. So I think again that's a really personalized to the business type of decision, right? Like if you're selling something that's cheaper, right? You do need marketing involved in the mix, because you can't spend big salaries on salespeople. Otherwise, the ROI isn't there on investing on the salesperson and your go-to-market model doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, with some industries, some types of sales, like marketing doesn't work as well as sales. In others, sales, doesn't work as well as marketing. Like I think there's so many things to factor in about that. And I'd be thinking about it more on a what makes sense for the type of client that you're selling to in reference to your go-to-market model, so that you can actually get the ROI that you need to on the said salesperson and that type of thing. Rather than, yeah, let's get someone cheaper and feed them some leads. I think that's possibly a way to think about it, but I'd be looking at it at a higher level as far as what's the overall strategy here. One thing I'll give you really quickly, right? When hiring salespeople, again, this came from one of my sales mentors, really, really excellent sort of way to think about it. Sales is three things, right? When you really break it down simply, it's opening. So cold calling, cold outreach, networking, finding opportunities, starting something from scratch, right? Open. Navigate, which is doing the demonstration, doing the proposal, talking through all of the details of, how we can solve your problem, going through the evaluation process. And then there's closing, right? Now, closing is not that one-liner thing that you see on all the movies that just pushes someone close. Like, sure, the closing, words can be part of the mix, right? But particularly when you're selling B2B, it almost becomes a project management job, right? You've got to get this approval, that approval, legal, procurement, your boss's boss's boss to make the final signature. Like that, mapping that whole thing out and navigating through that almost becomes a project management skill set, right? And so what tends to happen is salespeople get very good, like can almost master probably two of the three of them, but there's always one that lags behind a little bit, right? So for me, like I can do cold outreach, I do well at it, but am I the cream of the crop when it comes to cold calling? No. Am I really darn good at like navigating needs analysis, like doing the depths of BANT or TAS or whatever it is, navigating a really sophisticated sales process to move them along and get them closed? Yeah, I'm a gun at that, right? And every salesperson, if they're honest enough with themselves, will be able to self-identify where's their two more stronger points, and they're slightly like not weak point, right? They can do it, but not as good, right? And so when you're designing your sales and marketing lead generation strategy in and amongst all of that, that is something that I would factor in, is to like, what type of, like, I've had roles where I've been like, I need someone who's an excellent opener. We need pipeline generation. That's more important. The founder can come in and close, right? Or the founder's out there just generating all this opportunity, but man, they can't follow up for, the life of them. So let's get someone who's a darn good follow-up closer, can expand, find referral revenue, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's more of the lens to look at that through. I know we're just about out of time, so I'm just going to kick on, and I can stick around for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions at the end.